So by the time we get to 1604, when he's living here in the home of Christopher and Mary Mountjoy, he's a rich gentleman. He's invested in substantial real estate. He's bought for his family in 1596 the biggest, poshest house in Stratford-on-Avon. But he hasn't bought anywhere to live in London. In London, he hasn't got on the housing ladder. In London, he only lives in rented lodgings. And that's because even though he lived here for decades and worked here, he always, almost until the end, regarded himself as an actor on tour working in London. Home was Stratford. So when he had money to buy housing, he spent it in Stratford. But we know that he lived in rented accommodation here in the Mountjoy's house because of a lawsuit. This is what lawyers call a deposition. It's the evidence given in writing in connection with a lawsuit. Now, it is hard to read, especially as it's been taken down by two different clerks, so the handwriting changes halfway down. But when I read this, it does reinforce in my mind the correctness of the decision I took to give up the law and take up an interesting job as a tour guide. Because the problem with the law is it's great fun so long as you're dealing with other lawyers. The minute the public gets involved, whether as clients or witnesses, it becomes an absolute nightmare. And this case is no exception. So the story is that in 1604, William Shakespeare is living as a lodger in the home of the Mountjoys. The Mountjoys have got an unmarried daughter whom they would like to marry off to a man called Stephen Bellet, who used to be an apprentice to Christopher Mountjoy, but he's now in business on his own account. He's a decent catch. The Mountjoys want him to marry their daughter, and they want somebody with a way with words, a gift for words, a gift of the gab, to speak to Stephen Bellet and persuade him that he should marry their daughter. And they think, well, we've got this lodger who knows a bit about words. He's an actor. He's the most famous playwright in the country. Let's ask him to have a word with Bellet, which Shakespeare does. And as a result, Stephen Bellet marries young Miss Mountjoy, but there's a dispute because Bellet claims that Mountjoy promised him a dowry and the dowry wasn't paid. And so Bellet sues for the dowry. This dispute starts in 1604, but by the time it gets to court, it's 1612, 8 years later. If you're familiar with Hamlet, you'll know that speech that Shakespeare wrote about the law's delay. Well, here's a typical example. It finally gets to the point of taking depositions in 1612. And here is the deposition of, just read you the first line, William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon in the county of Warwick, gentleman of the age of 48 years or thereabouts. Now, I showed you at the beginning that we can't always be sure that we're talking about the right William Shakespeare, even if it's a William Shakespeare from Stratford in the county of Warwickshire. But here we've got not just the name and the place, but the age. And there was only one William Shakespeare who was baptized in Stratford 48 years before this. So this is absolutely our Shakespeare who's written this, or rather who's testified to this. So it's a really good resource for students of Shakespeare because it contains one of only 6 surviving signatures of William Shakespeare. But it's completely useless so far as the lawyers are concerned, because what does William Shakespeare's evidence say?